and thanks for remembering to record as well. So we have our tech people helping out, which is just fantastic. And they'll be keeping an eye on the chat. Can everyone see that? Is that coming up for everyone? Amazing. I love that double thumbs up, Victoria. That helped a lot, boss. I now can't see me clock, but we're on the 5 minute past mark. I will give like 1 more minute because I'm being proper generous, but then I will just make a start. And I just wish I could turn that doorbell off. We'll have to look into that. Oh, is sound and everything clear for everybody? Epic, thanks, Teresa. Oh, and I want to put it on speaker view. Let me see. I know speaker view doesn't really matter as much in this one, but Ash, is it worth trying to put it on speaker view for this bit? Oh, that's
can do.
Will you have a little go at that while I make a start?
I've got no powers, Paul. Can I have my powers back, please?
You have no power here, Gendel.
Thank you.
Little Game of Thrones clue for you guys. Right, we will make a little start. Let me look at my time. Yeah, it's 6 minutes past 7. I was proper generous there. So for anyone who has stumbled into this Zoom thinking, why am I here and what is going on? This is our Zoom discussion. Myself, a few of the crew who are on this call are from Merseyside BLM Alliance, and this has been done in partnership with Merseyside Alliance for Racial Equality. And it's a panel discussion, little presentation, a little bit of a Q&A, and also going to be used as a digital resource to discuss the impact of the environmental crisis on people of colour. I'll just reiterate that if you don't want to be in recording, turn your camera off. If you don't want your name in our recording, change your name. You can do that using the 3 little dots near the top right of one of your little squares somewhere. But yeah, this is going to be recorded and used as a community resource because we want as many people as possible in the fight against the climate emergency. Usual rules of Zoom apply. I've started talking, so I'd ask people to mute. If anyone does accidentally unmute themselves and we start in what you're having for your tea and all that, Ashley or Paul will mute you. It's not impersonal, just it was funny back in like lockdown 1, but now it's like, come on, we've got to get through this. So I'm just going to take you through my presentation before handing over to the panel, and I'll start. Oh, will I start? Because I just clicked my little button and it didn't work. Hold on. I might start. I'll start by kind of being really honest about my experience of kind of climate justice and the environmental emergency. So if you look at that closely, you'll notice that that picture is of me when I went to Sierra Leone with the school I work for. It was about 10 years ago, so I was proper like, I'm just like looking at that picture like I do need to get to the gym soon, but it was like, it was 10 years ago, so give me a little bit of credit there. And around 10 years ago, you know, we only know what we know, we don't know what we don't know. I'm going to be dead honest. I perceived climate justice activism as something that was for white middle class people. And this is because everywhere I saw climate justice activism, it was white middle class people. I didn't perceive it as a global south issue because it was presented in terms of what was going to happen to the West if we didn't take action. And it wasn't presented in terms of anything that was happening right now. That for me massively changed. I think it was 2012, if not 13, when I went to Sierra Leone. And absolutely gorgeous country, beautiful people. Parts of the country have got incredible beaches. One of them was used to film James Bond, beach number 5, and that one is fiercely protected and upkept. And then we went to see one of the beaches that the locals use, and I like just couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was just mounds and mounds of bottles coming in waves with the sea, and I was like, and even then it wasn't properly clicking that this is like the environmental crisis in the part of the global south are being used as a dumping grounds. Now, when I say the global south, it's not like geographically in the south of the globe. It's basically the global north as the west and the global south as, I will say, recovering countries. I feel like it's quite imperialistic to call countries developing when it was the west and colonialism that destroyed them. So they're recovering from colonialism. And so that really sort of sparked my interest in understanding what was happening, finding out more. And as a BLM activist, I think even now, this was 10 years ago, people kind of give you a bit of a look when you say that you do activism around climate justice, as if that's not really your lane. And I hope by the end of this session, if you were in any doubt about whose lane climate justice should be, there'll be no doubt there that it is definitely a lane where Black and global majority people belong, because we are disproportionately impacted by the environmental emergency, not just in relation to what's happening to our planet, but what's happening to our lived experiences and in our environmental experiences. So let's start with colonialism. I hope no one here thinks colonialism has ended, because there are still countries that are colonised by Britain. Although not nearly as many as there were years and years ago. Around 90% of the globe was colonised, and colonialism was kind of the next step after they abolished slavery. They decided they still wanted the resources and the wealth of these incredible countries, so they stayed in under colonialism, and rather than bringing people over, they brought food over, they brought resources, they took all of the money and the natural wealth that they could from these countries. And many people will argue, myself included, that capitalism is then the next step on from colonialism, because while we're not in there with armies and with people who call themselves leaders of these countries, and while countries have been emancipated and given freedom to a degree, there is still massive corporate interest in countries that were previously colonised and in continents that were previously colonised. And to give you some context of what makes, for example, the African continent so interesting, Africa is rich in natural resources such as gold and chromium and cobalt and diamonds. 60% of the world's arable land is in the African continent, so you can grow a lot of things there. 10% of the planet's internal renewable freshwater sources are on the African continent. And by 1914, 90% of Africa was controlled by 14 European countries. There is still a lot of European interest in Africa. While we won't be able to cover that today, I would invite anyone to look into the contemporary scramble for Africa. So the colonial scramble for Africa is what happened back in 1914. There is a contemporary scramble for Africa that continues to happen now, because looking forward, people still see the wealth that can be generated by the African continent, but not for African people. And when we think about things like the dumping that I explained before, there are mountains of waste which are piled up in Kenya. Ghana has the largest e-waste dumps in Africa, and a lot of the people working on these sites are exposed to harmful levels of pollution. In terms of farming and arable lands, India has a lot of arable lands, but then there's this whole situation where pesticides are sold to the farmers in order to get more crops out of the land. But year on year, there's less and less yields of crops, which has led a lot of farmers to become trapped in debt to people where they're trying to buy these pesticides and trying to keep up the amount of crops that they were producing the year before, and they can't because the land is being destroyed. And it actually has fueled a space of just an unbelievable amount of suicides. 12,000 died by suicide in a year, 300,000 in India since 1995, often using the very pesticides that they were sold. Could you mute yourself, Paul? That's my husband, by the way, just coming on, breaking the rules, giving me a bit of an echo. So committing suicide using the very pesticides that they were sold by these Western corporations. Again, some of the global south has been used for things like nuclear testing, and something that we talk about Rwanda and this kind of deportation of migrants to the UK from Rwanda, and I find that interesting, because the West is already foreseeing the global emergency and what it's doing to the global south, and the fact that that's going to cause enforced migration, it's going to cause climate migrants. We're already seeing it now. People's homes are being destroyed, and there's a lot of papers going around about how our borders are being fortified, basically to stop people who are living with, really bolstering up this migration law because of what they're doing, but not taking any action to address what they're doing. And for me, it's interesting, the whole Rwanda deportation, because the global north is responsible for the emissions of carbon that it takes in the UK 5 days to emit the carbon equivalent of what Rwanda emits in a year. And just some food for thought, really. But if you just think it's the global south again, we were wrong. It massively impacts the lived experiences of people of colour in the UK too. So this beautiful little girl on the left is called Ella Adu Kissy Deborah, or was called Ella Adu Kissy Deborah, because she died at the age of 9. She was from South London, and she was killed by a fatal asthma attack caused by unlawful levels of pollution near her home. And she was the first person in the UK to have her death recorded by pollution. We're having regular days where people in London are being told to stay inside or not to exercise outside because of the disproportionate levels of pollution in the air. And while they do impact areas of the UK and working class areas, because Black and global majority people disproportionately make up the working class and work in environments that are unsafe and exposed to high levels of pollution, it means that we're on the front line with a lot of this in terms of our proximity to highways and motorways, and also not having access to green spaces. Black British children are 30% more likely to be exposed to air pollution than white children, and respiratory outcomes for people of colour are lower. So people of colour are more likely to have things like asthma, and one of my family's got asthma, and most people of colour that I know, I've never really made those dots. Again, that's something that's happened in the last 10 years of, oh, actually this is because of where we sit. And when we think of events like Grenfell, which again, this is about the lived experiences of people of colour, the lived environment. That was an environment that campaigners have been years before Grenfell happened, but campaigners and Grenfell campaigners were campaigning about the A40, which is that main road that you drive in, whenever you're driving on London, you see Grenfell on the right, the A40 is that road. And they knew that that road being built would bring about disproportionate pollution levels and they'd be exposed to toxic air, and they were campaigning for years and years for that not to be built. So there's this concept of sacrificial zones, and sacrifice zones are basically areas that are geographical areas that are permanently impaired by heavy environmental damage. But there's a conscious decision by the government and by leaders that these zones are often zones with the highest level of diversity, and essentially that Black and brown people's lives are a sacrifice that people are willing to take in relation to the harm that is caused. And that is kind of a cornerstone of colonialism, that some lives, Black and brown lives, are worth less. And it's sown throughout this climate emergency and throughout what these big corporations are doing. There's this notion of, well, it's massively populated by Black and brown people, so we're happy to put the risk there. But you won't put these things in places where, for instance, there's a high proportion of white middle class people, because they're more likely to complain. If we look at things like the Edmonton incinerator in Enfield in London, that was placed in a diverse area because there's this belief, which is reflective of society, that Black and brown voices aren't as big and won't be heard as much. So these are deliberate decisions. And if we were in any doubt about the consequences of those decisions, COVID-19 really highlighted that for us. During the pandemic, Black and global majority people were expected to die at 1 times the national rate of death. As this graph showed, some of us actually died at 3 times the national rate of death, Black Caribbean people. And this is because of all of those things that we discussed consistently being put in working conditions, housing conditions, and health conditions where we're not able to access green spaces, where there's high levels of pollution. This is the outcome. The outcome is death. We've just shown you with the little girl, Ella, the outcome is death. And this is why it's really important that those who are living with this, living with unacceptably high levels of pollution, living in fear that the air that their children are breathing is toxic, working in unsafe places and not having access to green spaces, their voices should be heard. And this is why for Black civil rights movements such as ourselves as BLM, we should have a global outlook, and we should be reaching out across the diaspora to Black and brown voices from across the globe in the fight. against the climate emergency. So when we think about inclusive activism, this is actually Black Lives Matter in London. The picture on the left is the incredible BLM activists in London. Got a few that I know just there. And this is them leading the fight against the Edmonton incinerator. And it's important to allow people who are experiencing this, living through this, to have a place at the front, to have a voice at the front, and to have their voices heard. So again, we're on the front line in relation to the exposure to toxic pollution. Voices of people of colour should be platformed and not spoken on behalf of or over. And what I mean by that is we need to really understand when someone's being an ally or a saviour. And we don't need our voices spoken over. We can speak for ourselves. We can speak to our own experiences. And it's quite paternalistic and patronising when people think that they don't need the people who are living through and experiencing the climate emergency most sharply at this moment around the table, but we will speak on their behalf. If someone's got a story to tell, they should be allowed to tell it, and they should be front and centre of any climate justice movement. But even to this day, when I look around a lot of climate justice movements, we've still not got there. So we need to be actively trying to get there. And organisations and individuals need to be considering how to make space and facilitate the participation of people of colour in climate campaigns, literally door to door thinking, how am I going to get this person from their door to my campaign, to my event, to my action? And is this an event that they will feel safer? Because we know that at protests and things like that, if the police see a person of colour at a protest, their eyes are going to follow them all day long. So is the event that I am putting on a place where a person of colour will feel welcome and will feel safe? So these are all things that we should think about. And that's the end of my little presentation. And now I'm going to hand over to our fabulous panel. Who's going to go first? Teresa, you've just put an emoji up to clap, but I'm going to see that as you wanting to go first. I hope you're okay going first. If not, do let me know. So I'd love to hear from you. A, just your insights on how this is impacting people of colour, the climate emergency, and then B, any ways that you know that people of colour can get involved in climate justice campaigns and activism. That would be fantastic.
Oh, thanks, Chantelle, and that was great what you've just shared. Very comprehensive. And yeah, every time I see Ella, Adu, Kissy, Deborah, I always mention her name whenever I'm talking about pollution, because we owe that to her. Can you hear me properly? We owe that to her because she should be about 17 now. And I think it took about 7 years for her family to get the justice and that put on the death certificate when they should have been grieving the loss of that beautiful girl. So say her name. It's interesting when you talk to people about racial injustice and environmental and climate injustice, because they see people in the global south as over there and, oh, that's sad and that's so unfortunate. Well, what does that injustice look like? It's theft of land, it's theft of clean water, it's theft of seeds, so that people have to buy seeds every year to grow their crops, where for centuries they dried their seeds out, they planted their crops. If the crops fail, that was quite disappointing, but financially they weren't impacted. They just had to think how to do it better next time if a drought came or whatever. So they're beholden to those in the West or the Northern Territories or the global North, whatever you want to call it. For me, it's not important what we call it. It's about what they're doing to them. Now, the people in the global South don't have to do anything because their carbon footprint is so low. Their carbon footprint is ours by proxy. Let's make that clear. So when our toxic governments say, oh, we're meeting our targets, well, of course you are, because you've farmed out all your production to Africa, India, and parts of Asia. So the pollution has been farmed out. All the toxic chemicals and pesticides are poisoning their water, not ours. And they are actually producing the wants and desires of the global North, because every human being has needs: clothing, clean water, shelter. That's what we need. Now, when you start producing for others, you're denied your needs because you're busy working and doing what you need to do. You can't self-care, you can't take care of your children. So what does that look like? racial injustice, climate injustice. It's children walking miles a day for hours at a time to go and collect a bucket of clean water when they should actually be in school. And there are people who argue that, oh, at least those children have got a job. The only job any child on this planet should have is to go to school, to educate themselves so they can arrive at a better place and they can become the professionals of tomorrow. The global south is where most of the people on the planet live. So if only those in the global north are aspiring, where are your doctors, your scientists, your inventors, your teachers, your academics, your cancer doctors, your surgeons going to come from? Because we'll get to a point where there's a shortage of all of those professions because of the decimation of people in the global south. Children around the globe, black and brown children predominantly, but from other ethnicities, are going to work in people's homes, rich people's homes. So children from about the age of 10, particularly girls, no longer go to school. They have to take jobs to support the family because the family are struggling, suffering, children are malnourished, their parents are working the land for the global north, for the huge corporations. So they're out at work all day. So the young girls have to stay at home and do the cooking. They're cooking on stoves that are kerosene stoves that are toxic, or they're burning dung, which is toxic. And if it's inside the homes, they're taking on more pollution. So all of this goes to stealing their future health, their future lives. And for a lot of children, their aspiration to adulthood. I always talk about children because they don't all aspire to become adults. So it's not that I'm dismissing adults who are suffering and whose lives are decimated, but we should always talk about the children. So these children are working in rich people's homes in Africa, India, Asia. They're being physically, verbally, mentally, and at times sexually abused by the parents, the guardians, and sometimes the children. They're sleeping on floors. They're not being fed, and they're on call 24 hours a day. If they don't stay at the homes and they have to go home every day, it's out at sunup and back at sundown. So they risk being attacked, kidnapped, forced into modern slavery, risk being raped and murdered. This is how children are living around the globe. And that impact is because of what's happening in the West, in the global south. And people can try and argue and separate that, but what's happening here is what impacts them and renders them destitute. So when we look at what's happening there, if you steal people's clean water to cool down machinery in factories that are producing for the global north, those people don't have access to that water. They're drinking polluted water, water full of bacteria, their children get sick. Then the pharmaceutical companies come in and say, oh, we'll give them anti-diarrhea tablets to enable them to go to school. The tablets don't work, they make the children sick, they remain at home, and that causes further impact on the family. So we have to look at the toxic narratives, what people are saying, what they're doing, they're ticking a box, they're giving money to charity and they feel that's enough. Or you say you're supporting children in Africa and you're paying for mosquito nets, and they'll tell you they don't really get the money. I don't buy into any of that. Well, if I give £10 for a mosquito net and one child gets a net, that's one life you've saved. So I don't need to get into the minutiae of the corruption in them countries because they had good teachers from the global north, the West, particularly the UK. Let's just own that because that's where I live right now. And so when we're looking at the impact on those children, they're not allowed to aspire. So there are graves, paupers' graves around the world that are full of children who weren't allowed to aspire, who could have been the person who found a cure for cancer, who could have been the top brain surgeon, who could have been the top scientist. So we are a lesser global society because we render most of the people in the world destitute. And I have to look at what can I do? I'm always constantly checking what can I do as an individual, because there are many things that people can do. Not everybody in the West is rich, But can you speak to other people? Can you dispel the myths? Can you correct the toxic narrative? Because I hear a lot of people saying, oh, people in Africa and India and Asia, you know, all they do is have children. If they just stopped, everything would be okay. Well, it wouldn't. They also don't have any rights to contraception like we didn't before the 60s, when people in this country were having 13, 14, 15, 16 children. Nobody talks about that. They're in the same situation. If you don't have access to your own autonomy on your body, and it's patriarchy that's dictating that you should have more and more children, you don't have the right to say no, you don't have the right to stop the pregnancies. They're in the situation that we were in back then. So we shouldn't look at ourselves as civilized and say, oh, what they do down there is so primitive. And every time I hear that word, it drives me mad, because I think we should all be primitive, actually, because we would respect the land, we would respect the water and respect the air that we breathe, because the so-called primitive people around the globe are the ones that do that. They don't use pesticides to poison the soil, to poison the water and to pollute the air. So let's go back to being primitive, because I would rather be there right now. We wouldn't have the situation we have. We wouldn't be fighting this decimation. And it's interesting, it's only when it crosses the pond that people in the West start to take notice. Ebola was in Africa for decades, and people were dying in Africa for decades, and nobody batted an eyelid. As soon as Ebola came across the pond, all of a sudden people woke up. They wanted to know what this was. They were terrified. And it's quite sad that that's the behavior of a lot of people in the global north. We have a lot of great people fighting and campaigning, but we have to look at what our governments are doing, how they're decimating the rest of the world, because that's the intention. Capitalism can't flourish if you don't have an abundance of poor, destitute people. And it does impact Black and brown people more. That's a fact just by default, because of racism, because of demonization. They're always going to be the bottom of the pile. I think when we talk about things that we can do to help, a lot of people don't know there are cooperatives around the globe, particularly in the global south, where women have taken back control. They're taking control of their land. They're borrowing, it's called micro loans, where they borrow a very tiny amount of money and then they pay that back very quickly, and they have control over what they grow. They can grow for the community. What they don't use, they can sell at a fair price, and that lifts the community. They produce amazing goods that can be sold globally. And I'm sure there's a way of finding out where all these cooperatives are and purchasing goods from them, because after all, they've done a great service to the global north by providing all the wants and desires and needs. So let's return that favour. Let's buy their wonderful goods they make, like scarves and blankets and rugs and jewellery and bags. And they're ethical goods as well, so that will benefit the whole of the planet. So there are so many things we can do as individuals, that we can do as collectives, even if you can't do anything else, but just speak to people and talk about the impact of what we do, which is impacting in the global south. That's enough. Dispel the myths, make sure you're constantly speaking about that, and I'm sure that will bring about greater change. I believe a better world is possible, but we all have to start with ourselves. What can I do? What can they do? What can we do? And I'll just finish with one thing. I have little snippets of things that I say to people, and one of them is everything we use, wear and eat in the global north is dripping in the blood of children in Africa, India and most of Asia. And if we add a warning on all of our food, all the clothes we wear and all the goods we buy, maybe that would prompt us. We shouldn't need those prompts, because we know when we get cheap food and cheap clothes and cheap everything else, that somebody is paying a high price. So I'd just like to leave it there, and thanks for listening.
That was incredible, Teresa. Thank you so much. Big up to you. That was just so thought-provoking. The takeaway that I was probably quote that I'd probably have from that was stealing the future of our children, and that is essentially what is happening right now with the climate emergency. We're stealing quality and quantity of life from our children. But thank you so much, Teresa. I'll move on to our next speaker. Dan, are you on the mic? Are you there?
Hey, what's happening, everyone? How we doing? We okay, yeah?
Brilliant.
Apologies.
Are you going to jump straight in? Go on.
Yeah, go on. Is that cool? Wicked. Apologies for my signal, by the way. I've got internet issues, but, you know, at least I've got internet issues. At least some people don't even have internet. Do you know what I mean? So life's good for me half the way there. I'm Dan Lewis. I've been an anti-racist campaigner and activist for quite some time. And I suppose for me, where it really started is naturally because of, I don't know if you noticed my skin color, but when I was a kid, because living in the UK, it's mad. I'm meant to be going on a train later tonight, but it's not happening, to Southend, where my dad now lives. And that was probably one of the first places where I experienced racism. My nan was visiting from Mauritius, and these kids on scooters came past us, and we were walking down. It was a nice summer evening, and we didn't live in Southend back then. Well, I never lived there, but we were just walking down, you know, by the beach, and these kids on scooters came past, and they threw their whole ice creams. Like, I was shocked that they wasted the ice cream, because I was thinking, wow, imagine if I wasted an ice cream. My mum would beat me. But the reason they threw their ice creams was to throw them at my nan, because she was wearing a sari and she's brown, and they started making ding ding noises and stuff. And they rode off on their scooters. And that was like, what on earth? And I remember thinking, like, what's the difference between us? And whenever I went over to Mauritius as a kid, like, that would play in my head, like, what's the difference? What is the difference? And I remember my uncle in Mauritius. He's always proud. He's so proud of Mauritius, which I am as well. But I loved the way he spoke about his pride in the people, the country, the nature, everything. And one of the things he said he's most proud of is the architecture in Mauritius. And I found it odd, because being a dumb London kid, I was like, nah, man, we've got Canary Wharf, you're mad. And he was like, no, but our buildings, they can withstand anything. Now, I think he totally missed out earthquakes, but I'm guessing he doesn't have to worry about earthquakes. But in Mauritius, every year they get cyclone season in around January, like our winter, basically. And he said, every year we build our buildings stronger. We build them stronger and stronger. We become stronger as a people, because the weather is getting worse because of you guys. And I was like, who? We? What do you mean? Like, and then there's there was that difference there. It's like, oh, I get it. Because like, basically in Mauritius, you know, they called me Chipchi Blanc, which is, they speak like a patois, which is broken of multiple languages. But that means small white. Which is basically, I was the small white boy, because I was the whitest out of all the family. And I came from England, and I was born in England. And there was the difference. It was like, oh, okay, like, I'm starting to understand it a bit more. It's like, it's not, obviously I've got the skin color side of things, but what else is the difference? And I started to understand a bit more. It's like, it's a way of life. There's a culture, there's this, there's that. But really, what it is if I look back further, as I got older, I started to understand more. It's that there is always a divide in what happens in the global north to the global south, and who has the biggest influence on what happens. And I think Chantelle and Teresa have really perfectly laid out a lot of the facts and information about, you know, what is actually going on, where our clothes from, where our clothes come from, where our food comes from, and the types of issues that occur in the global south. But then also, like I say, is my uncle was talking about the weather side of things. As weather cycles change, they increase, and people have to become more resilient of those changes in the weather cycles. And what happens is that the technology, or the ideas that are used, and the skills that they have in the global south are then, just like before, it was the resources, it was the land, it was the the plants, the food, and the skills of the people. Now it's the ideas that they come up with, or it has been for a while, the ideas that people come up with, and then the technology. And then what they do is they literally take the ideas from Mauritius, and they're like, and I think George Osborne did this so well a few years ago, right? He stood there in Parliament, and it was nearly a copy of a scene from one of those 80s programs where he said, well, we've learned how to make the curries, we've got the people who can make the curries, and now we don't need them, so we're going to send them back and we'll just make the curries ourselves. And I've probably quoted that terribly, but you know, I'm not really bothered about quoting Tories correctly. But basically, it's like, we're going to get your people, we're going to get your resources, we're going to use them, we're going to learn how to do it ourselves, and then we're going to send you back to wherever it is that we forced you out of, forced you to come from. And then on top of that as well, we're going to use your resources that you've got there to they're turning places like Mauritius into, so just to give you a bit of pretext on what it is that they're using it for, is that, you know, like if you make a complaint to Facebook about someone's post, like let's say, I don't know, Natasha's posted something and I don't like it, and I click the 3 little buttons and I say, report this because it was rude to dogs and I'm offended. And then it goes through their system. And you think to yourself in your head, like, either there's a computer that decides whether it's bad or not, and that's a really bad idea, letting a computer decide on what is hate speech and what isn't, or there's a person. Now, you would naturally presume that that person might be someone who natively speaks the language that you're typing in, someone who actually understands the way of life and culture and everything. But it isn't. It's someone in the global south who is forced to do these checks on reports that you send through. And like in call centers here, where you have to answer 5 calls an hour, they have to resolve like 50 excuse me 50 of these reports in like 10 minutes or something, and they're just having to click through them, and these people are being forced more and more and more. And then when we're not happy about these reports, when we're not happy about these reports and we complain about the report that's come back, those people are penalized more, and they're forced into workspaces. Now, where I'm talking about in Mauritius, you get a lot of this in some Northern African countries and South Asian countries. What happens is like these offices that they set up, they are on what they set them up in what's known as derelict land. And that derelict land is not actually, thanks Ashley, is not actually derelict land. In Mauritius specifically, it's formerly sugar plantation land. So Mauritius was a land rich, full of resources in sugar. Like literally, I could wake up in the morning, walk to the bottom of my nan's path, and go and just pull a sugar cane out of the ground. It doesn't matter whose it is, right? There's no one gonna come and get me and go, oh, you're not allowed that. I could just pull it out of this massive field and eat some sugar cane, have it with my breakfast, whatever. Obviously, I don't recommend eating sugar cane for breakfast. But if you do, enjoy it. But the point is, what they do is they start to remove these bits of land because they find out that they can grow the sugarcane. They don't have to ship it all the way from Mauritius, all the way from the Caribbean. They can start to grow the sugarcane and other different types of crops in closer places to the UK, damage the resources wherever it is that they, or the land, wherever it is that they're doing it. And the same thing, and then start to build more office spaces, more industrial spaces where like Marks and Spencer's have a massive hold on, specifically Mauritius again. Now, the thing is, some of these things you might know about, you might not know about. Looking at the crowd in here, I recognize a few names. Some of you are involved in different types of activism. But who is talking about this stuff, right? I've not given you detailed facts on all these things because I've only got so much time. But who is talking about it? Now, I've got an interesting, I'm on the wrong page, but I've got an interesting little thing here because just last year, 2021, there was extreme weather and hunger in Zambia, right? Do you know how many in the space of 1st of January to 31st December 2021, do you know how many online news articles there was about extreme weather and hunger in Zambia? There were 512, right? Now, I can go into it. I've got them somewhere, but there's like even death numbers, and the death tolls are crazy, especially with COVID and other things going on. Now, the other end is in Honduras, there is a lot of poverty and violence going on there. Who is talking about it? And these are directly because of colonialism and the impact of climate change. But there were 3,920 articles, right? So that's better, 3,920. But just think about the fact that Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk's space flights had 239,422 online articles about their space flights. They only went up to space like once each, right? People are dying in all of these places. I'm going to say these places because I think it's important that we do. Zambia, Malawi, Central African Republic, Guatemala, Colombia, Burundi, Niger, Zimbabwe, and Honduras. All of these places, people are dying because of the impacts of colonialism and climate change and capitalism. No one's talking about them. And the one thing, I think a notification came up to tell me to wrap up, so I am wrapping up right now. Excuse me. The thing that we can do to turn this around, because I'm involved in media and comms, that's my job, that's my hobby, that's my fun thing. And I like when people talk about things. And I think it's important when people like ourselves start talking about these things, we start to create the narrative, we start to create the message, and we start to create what Twitter calls a trend, or even whatever platform you're on, do it. The way we do that is we start to find the company, the organizations that are writing about it, and we start talking about it ourselves, and we start to make sure that we're sharing these messages, not just online, but in person, in conversation, whether it's in the pub, the cafe, or outside the school gates. Now, one of the places where you can definitely find a lot of organizations, because I want to be able to give you something practical that you can take away, a lot of organizations, media organizations that are talking about these issues is the Independent Media Association. And they're an association of independent media organizations, mostly based in the UK, but they talk about global issues, they talk about climate change, they talk about the global south, and they talk about it in a way that we've never heard in the mainstream media before. And the more that we're logging onto these organizations' websites, the more that we're sharing their links, whether it's on WhatsApp or in an email or even on social media, the more reach they get and the more obviously income they get from if they've got ads and stuff. And also you can sign up to them. I'm not going to do a sales pitch, but that option is there for you because that does help them as well. And that's the main thing, the main point I wanted to give you all to take away from this is that there's a few facts that you may not have ever known about. Mauritius is a tiny little island in the Indian Ocean, just off of Madagascar, and it's one of the African nations. Of course, you're not going to know about it, but if more people are talking about it, like I am today, and like Teresa and Chantelle and Tasha's about to, then the better. So please do check out the Independent Media Association. Stop clicking on BBC, stop clicking on the Daily Mail and any of the other mainstream ones. I know we all get our news from them, but start to think about those independent media associations that are talking about Black lives because we fucking matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. That was brilliant. That was absolutely brilliant. And I didn't know all of that about Mauritius. And I think you made a powerful point about independent media. Like quite often, independent media will go into such depth on the issues that we need to know a lot about. And, you know, mainstream media is a whole mess that we haven't got time to go into right now. But if more of us read and share independent media, then that's going to be our main news source, and it's going to be more representative to the lived experiences of diverse groups, of marginalized groups, and talking about things like climate change. I know organisations and campaigns like ourselves, BLM, got a lot more support from independent media than we did mainstream media. So it is a really useful channel, and it's really good to get it up there while they still have the free voices that they have. So our next panelist is Natasha. I'm sure you're there somewhere. Let me see.
I am. Can you hear me?
You're there. I can. Go on.
Cool, fantastic. Well, two fantastic speakers, so it's going to be hard for me to kind of follow on with my points, but I'll give it my best shot. So like often when we talk about the climate crisis in like a global context, you get so many people that kind of come out the woodworks to say that we've got an overpopulation problem, that the global south has an overpopulation problem, that they need to control their populations because that's what's causing the issue. And within this, there are so many layers to kind of unpack that link between the creation of eugenics and the idea of the superior race, to how colonialism has been redefined in the modern day to move the responsibility away from global north countries, but also just the total inaccuracies of this idea that overpopulation of Black and brown people is what's causing the environmental crisis. And I mean, as Chantelle said before, our carbon footprint in 5 days in the UK is the same of a person in Rwanda for a whole year. So to me, that says it's not an overpopulation issue, but rather an overconsumption of carbon intensive activities issues, and with little to no understanding of the impact that has on our environment and global climate, because it's not directly felt here to the level it is in the global south. And even in recent times, you know, we've had the hottest heat waves ever recorded in the UK, with fires breaking out in Kent and London, and some people thinking that this is an exciting thing, and that's a whole other conversation in itself. But in reality, it's going to be the coldest summer we experience if we carry on the trajectory that we're currently going on. And in places like South Asia, in like Pakistan, India, there's been prolonged heat that has been lasting for weeks on end, with the month of March being the hottest recorded in the region since records began 122 years ago. And what this actually means for people living there is that there was 62% less rainfall, which has now resulted in an estimated of 10 to 35% less crop yield, something which is going to have a massively detrimental impact on the livelihoods of many people living in those particular regions. And then recently, we've now seen this heat be followed by mass flooding in places like Karachi in Pakistan, where cisterns were banned as an option of rainwater collection by a colonial administration, which means that they saw the worst flood in the regions ever seen again since records began, but unfortunately weren't able to kind of mitigate the kind of after effects of the climate crisis that we're now seeing. And this is just one of the many examples that I could list off about how the legacy of colonialism has impacted and shaped the global south countries, and how those who have done little to nothing to contribute to the warming of the planet are being affected the most by the climate crisis. And I think it's so sad to see so many people now becoming ever so slightly more aware of how the climate crisis is really going to have a devastating impact, even though for many years it has been part of the conversation that we've been having, particularly if you are in climate kind of circles. But unfortunately, as I say, people are only now becoming aware because we've had heat waves in the south of the country. And I think a lot of it means that people are now being led down this eco-fascist, individualist route of overpopulation, and that's what's causing the issues. And I think plenty of people buy into this eugenics argument. And I say it's a eugenics argument because how we even talk about the global south, or how many people in this country view the global south, is as lesser, as less developed, or as inferior, without first analysing the colonialist ties with why we view these countries this way. And secondly, what our responsibility has been in intentionally underdeveloping, and in some cases deindustrialising, many countries to the point that we are at today. And I see so many people come out with the David Attenborough as a national treasure, but many of his documentaries point to this view of overpopulation, and in his words, developing countries are the problem for the environmental and climate crisis that we face. And again, that is just simply untrue. And there's like a video of him that he's done with the WWF where he does a voiceover for it, and he states in it that we should stabilize the human population as low as we fairly can, whilst images of people of color flashed across the screen, something which they later had to come out with a statement and apologize for. But the fact that even got the go-ahead from the WWF, which I'm sure many of us in the room aren't surprised, like, given about their kind of context and their background as an organization. But this kind of idea of connecting firstly people of color exclusively to the global south, but also suggesting that they are less civilized and they are the root of the problem, is an inherently racist idea in itself, and that we in the global north apparently need to save them and help them develop and control their population. But also that we would need to combat climate crisis, all we need to do to combat climate crisis is to control populations, is so inaccurate, given that we in the global north and in the UK have massive carbon footprints. And as I'm sure we're all aware, the real cause of these issues is capitalism. The real cause of the issue is global north greed, overconsumption for mass profit at a consequence to the planet. And the real cause is fossil fuel companies who have known about global warming since the 1970s and were actually the creator of the word carbon footprint in itself, to remove the responsibility and put the onus on us as individuals, when it is impossible for us as individuals to navigate our way out of a crisis when just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions. And I think we have to worry as we start to feel the effects more and more in the UK and in the global north countries about how the narrative will move towards ecofascism, towards the pseudoscience of a population theory, towards that colonial legacy of racism, towards those who were displaced because of mass drought, mass fires, mass floods, total ecological destruction in the global south, and how we in the global north react to it. And we are already seeing the foundations of it being built in the Rwanda plan, and how differently refugees who come to this country due to environmental collapse are treated totally differently from Ukrainian refugees. And so we have to prepare to safeguard Black and brown cousins in the global south from this here in the UK. And it's how we see racism be redefined and become more nuanced and become more acceptable, because we are seeing this idea that it's totally acceptable for what is happening in the global south to be happening to those people there. And again, we can talk about this in a good case study when we talk about the fast fashion industry and how it's redefined colonialism in two ways. Firstly, through the materials that fashion depends on, so cheap polyester and large consumptions of cotton that amounts to more than 80% of fibre production in the whole world. And 99% of the people in the cotton industry are the global majority from global south countries in low-paid jobs working in unsafe conditions. And these materials put a massive environmental strain on the planet by using vast amounts of water and electricity to produce products that break down in their design but have fibres that have last for long periods in our environment. And secondly, we see it in our so-called recycled clothes. In Europe, we throw away 6 million tonnes of textiles every year, and 1.5 of these tonnes get recycled or rather dumped in the global south market. And consequently, the subsequent sale of these clothes in developing countries or in global south countries has dropped due to receiving an influx of clothing from our countries. And a consequence, what would need for West African countries, for example, to have their economies to develop with that 5% of their own cotton need to be used within their own fashion industry, but at a consequence less than 1% is used. And Chantelle mentioned before that the UK sends 95% of their secondhand clothes to Ghana, and we are massively undercutting their economies, preventing them from being able to build economies in the aftermath of colonialism. And the UK and the US are two of the world's biggest exporters to the East African community. And in 2016, the EAC, as a regional economic group, wanted to completely ban the import of secondhand clothes to the region and increase tariffs in the meantime until it was done. But this caused the US to threaten to remove them from the Africa Growth and Opportunities Act, which is an economic trade act that gives East African countries more money. And at the cost of that, the leaders of the EAC wanted to have their own industries grow, but they feared losing this funding would mean that 355,000 jobs would lost and $230 million in income. So for me, I see these facts, and I know that I've thrown them off very quickly there, as how the climate crisis is still colonialism redefined, and how we are still using imperial tactics to subdue the African content and still feed into this narrative that those in the global south were always destined to have colonialism, and that the white saviour complex of the global north means that we had to get involved in the scramble for Africa because we needed to control them because it would be economically beneficial. And again, in this country, recycling clothes and giving them to charity is seen as a good thing. It makes people in this country feel good about themselves because, again, going back to this idea of individualism that we've been sold through capitalism, it makes many white middle class people in the UK feel good, like they're doing their part without thinking about the environmental and economic impact that it has on a global scale. And, you know, we could talk a little bit about COP26 being held in Glasgow. And although it's something that the UN conference has been doing for 3 decades, it was a massive disappointment in terms of the greenwashing we saw, in terms of who was invited to the table to talk about the crisis, and how, even though it's massively and disproportionately affecting Black and brown and Indigenous people from the global south, how little the representation there was when governments were coming together to talk about these issues. And again, even things like the greenwashing policy of banning deforestation, the Amazon rainforest, with actual no legal kind of framework or context to actually be able to police that and what that means for those Indigenous communities there. And during that, there was a talk about the reparations and debt and climate justice, and people from the global south spoke about how they're often global south countries are in $400 billion worth of debt to the global north, and it's that inherent link again with colonialism, because we have profited from the resource extraction and how that has the consequences of subduing their economies. And it also means that in terms of climate solutions and in terms of moving to renewables, and the lack of acknowledgement in the fact that renewables are fueling colonialism, because we get parts from Africa and from South America through lithium and cobalt mines. But secondly, that these climate solutions are going to be sold to the global south through debt collection again, so to further loan them further a lot more money, and also to again kind of carry on that colonialism that we've seen. So again, just briefly, I think one of the biggest links that we can turn around within this is that racial justice is climate justice, and getting involved in racial justice campaigns is massive in changing kind of the inherent empirical and colonial ideas that are deep rooted within this country, that people in the global south are worthy of the treatment that is happening because of the climate crisis. And as Dan said, it's having conversations with people we know, sharing the message that we've learned, and then getting people to engage in the conversations and joining that local and national organisations as well, just within your local area, to kind of fight and get this message across.
Huge clap there. That was incredible, absolutely brilliant. Natasha, thank you so much for your contribution. I think the bit that just resonated with me is this kind of colonial morality mission of Blinken, civilizing people who were perfectly civil before the West came along, and also downgrading Indigenous knowledge. You know, that's really sharply felt in places like Australia, where Indigenous peoples have known how to prevent forest fires, and that knowledge is just brushed to the side. So thank you so much for highlighting that. I'm sure people will have loads of questions for you when we open up for questions too. But before we open up for questions, we are going to have River on, and I just want people to be thinking about ways that people of colour can be getting involved in climate justice campaigns. If you've got any campaigns that you know of, put them in the chat, put any links in the chat, anything that would be of interest, any articles. And what we're going to collate is a resource pack that will be sent out to everyone who's attended this event. It'll be digital, obviously. We're not going to use any paper. We've got a load of resources ourselves that people might be interested in, but it'd be great if we could combine our knowledge and just start thinking about questions as well, because it's going to be Q&As in a minute, guys. But River, if you are still here, would you be able to unmute and just tell us how people can get involved in Just Stop Oil and what Just Stop Oil's about, if nobody knows? Where are you?
Yeah, no problem. I'm here. I've got my camera off because my internet's been playing up all day, so it seems if I have my camera on, it's glitching a bit. So apologies for that. So I'm River Olivia Rose. Been involved in activism sporadically, I must admit, for about 10 years. But yeah, there's a lot that I do get involved in, but I class myself, I don't really tie myself to one specific group. I just independently work with what I prioritise at the time. So I've been with Just Stop Oil just over a month now. I met them at, I was speaking at a festival called the Small World Festival, which is down in Headcorn in Kent, which is definitely a festival for activists, and a really good opportunity to network and actually have a bit of downtime, but also network and do some brainstorming together. So that there's another one of those actually in August. I think it's the 21st to the 21st to the 25th of August. So I would highly recommend it for anybody that is into activism or campaigning. So I met Larch, who's one of the heads of Just Stop Oil there, and got chatting to him and was immediately involved. So Just Stop Oil is exactly what it says on the tin. It is a group of people, mainly young people, that are supported by adult involvement. It's classed as a company rather than an organisation. So it is a registered company. So there's lots of ways to be involved with Just Stop Oil. So basically, scientists from around the world and the UK that have worked for the government over 25 years and written serious reports about stopping oil and how fossil fuel and consumption is basically destroying the planet, but mostly the POC and Black Indigenous areas, so the South. And sorry, I'm getting my words mixed up. It's been a long day. So what they're trying to say is they wrote these reports to governing bodies saying how they cannot carry on the way they are. And basically the government, especially the UK government, has hidden the report, shoved it under a rug, told these scientists, don't say anything, hush your noise, we're going to carry on as business as usual. These scientists have come away and gone, absolutely not. So basically, we've only got about 2 or 3 years left to carry on the way we are where oil's concerned. And they said that to countries that are producing and distributing oil, use the oil that you've got left, and then you can start using alternative methods because it's not like there isn't alternative methods that you can use as an alternative to oil and fossil fuel consumption. So we're not saying that everybody's got to completely change the way that they live, but what we're saying is that there are more humane and reasonable ways in which you can do it. That's not being put in the public eye, but it is starting to be, but it's being drip fed slowly and it's not quick enough. So what we've got is various different teams with Just Stop Oil, and there's various ways that you can be involved. So there's everything from like canvassing and door knocking, raising awareness, there's the campaigning, there's admin side, there's teams for media, and then there's also teams that do direct action. it is an all hands on deck situation, and it really, really does affect racism. When people will say to me, oh, but you're with BLM Leeds, how come now you're with Just Stop Oil, or how come you're with Extinction Rebellion, how come you're doing this, that and the other, and I dot about all these different groups. And maybe some of you, I know some of you do, maybe some of you don't, but I've worked with, I class Marvina Newton as my sister, and she laid it in layman terms to me like years ago, because even I turned around and said, how does the climate change affect racism? What's the link there? And she said, we can't. She really did simplify it for me before she broadened the horizon. And she said, we can't end racism until we end poverty. And we cannot end poverty until we tackle climate change. And she really did explain it in a simple way, but that inspired me to go and do my own research, which Marvina's very good at doing. She'll set these seeds in your head and then watch them grow. And so basically, the impact on Black and Indigenous and POC communities in 2/3 of the world through the way that we live. And so I'm echoing what's already been said, and it is spot on. So the main cause of this is capitalism, and it is also consumerism. Capitalism is something that's really, really hard to shift or raise awareness of, because you're so brainwashed within it, and you don't realise how it's just ingrained, especially in the last few generations of people within our societies. Now, consumerism is something that we can independently take like an independent approach to and start changing. So when you are hearing things about your diet, what's in your food, I mean, I'll only use like independent Black owned companies for like my fruit, my veg, things like that, because one, I don't trust mainstream supermarkets, and two, that half of the fruit and the veg that are in there, it's genetically modified. It's not even real, and it's drenched in wax and all sorts of different things. So you can't really trust anything when it comes to your clothes, when it comes to your car, when it comes to even your education, or your or the food that you're eating. Really, really independently do some self-study and start getting to grips with actually what's going on. So when it comes to racism and colonialism as well, I wouldn't be doing my bit if I didn't raise the fact that when it comes to slavery, I, for one, do not believe that has ever been abolished. It's just been rebranded. And that's how it is. So there's a really good documentary that is due to be released in the UK. So I was on the debut of that, done by Dr. Baz. And even though I'm touching on the criminal justice system, which should really be called the criminal legal system, because it's got no ounce of justice for me or my people whatsoever. So it's misleading from the get-go. So it's called Incarceration Nation. And what it demonstrates is, so Dr. Baz has gone all around the world and talked to people that have been falsely incarcerated or just incarcerated, demonstrating how the slave trade was basically just rebranded, and it's the criminal justice system, and how it's disproportionate of how many Black people and POC people are being locked up, usually falsely incarcerated, and then forced to work or do all these abhorrent things whilst in the prison system, and then they lose their rights and their families. So they lose their families, they'll lose their homes, they lose their prospects for employment, they lose their like medical insurance in certain countries, they'll lose their rights to vote in certain countries and in certain states in America. And it's this ongoing issue that demonstrates colonialism. And so even though people say, oh, but we don't go through that now, yes, we do. We absolutely do, and we do every day. And even into our country, I do not agree or have any description of agreements with the word Britain or the United Kingdom. We are not united. This is England at the end of the day. Like Scotland does not claim England, Wales does not claim England, Ireland certainly does not claim England. So I just see England as this like cancerous tumour on the planet that is spread, and it's at stage 5, and we really need to do something to help it. So that's my view on it. So what you can do to be involved with Just Stop Oil is you can contact them. They are on, there is a website called Just Stop Oil. They do tend to use a app called Signal, which I would recommend that you download. They do have a lot of paid positions as well for activism. So you can get anything from £800 to about £1,200 a month, depending on what your availability is. You'll get an initial phone call off one of the admin team after your recruitment. And what that will do is highlight what your availability is, what your talents are. You just have a chat about who you are, how you can be involved. And like I said, it could be anything from admin right through to direct action. There are quite a few things going on at the minute, which I'm reluctant to talk too much about on this platform because it is quite anonymous, and talking to the wrong people or that information getting into the wrong hands could jeopardize the whole operation, and I'm not prepared to be the one that does that. So if you are interested, which I really, really hope that you are, they have looked after me. When I've been on direct actions with them, I've got to say that I have been really well looked after. So you can get your wage, but then your expenses are on top of that. I've been literally all over the country with them in the last month or so. And you could go to like festivals for free and just do recruiting. You could be I went and did, the first time I felt let down was on Saturday, and so they asked me to go as a representative of BLM. So I tried to contact BLM Merseyside through Marvina. I contacted Marvina and also BLM Hull, but it was short notice. But then I was one of the only BLM activists there, and I was all soldier boyed up, and I felt really vulnerable because I didn't have my people with me, and I didn't feel that they were ready to demonstrate the allyship that BLM need if you're going to work in coalition with BLM and Just Stop Oil and other organisations coming together in solidarity. So that is a meeting that I'm going to be holding through Just Stop Oil of how to be a good ally and what solidarity looks like. Like I was on an action the other week in Wales with Just Stop Oil and XR. Sorry, excuse me, I've just got over COVID. So and then as we're going on to the action, because I was the only black girl there, and I said, this is a bit bang out of order, why have you invited me when I'm like on my own? And so they gathered their solution to that was to circle around me while we're all in these suits and matching suits and masks, moving forward and start singing There's a Brown Girl in the Ring. That's not what solidarity looks like to me. So there is, when Chantelle and other members of the panel have said there's a lot to learn and you need to work in solidarity and allyship and think, I cannot stress that enough. If you are going to come on board with Black Lives Matter and you're going to work in that solidarity, like we're all preaching and which needs to happen, then you need to learn what that solidarity looks like. So there are going to be workshops run on Zoom. I am also on the panel to do the equality and diversity, because it is whitewashed at the minute. There is a few, even though they're not from Black Lives Matter, there are some Black and POC in there, but it's you got to look hard for them, and it's just like, it shouldn't be like that. This is a movement that is directly affecting the biggest majority of our community, whether that is locally or globally. You need to listen to us. You need to elevate our voices. You need us on our panels. You need us on your board of directors. You need us in your trustees. You need us in your decision-making panels. And until I see that, I'm not going to be 100% committed, but I am more than willing to be committed to making that happen. But I can't do it on my own. And that's why I'm here to say, can you please be on board? Because I do believe in the ethos of Just Stop Oil. I do believe they can achieve the changes that we need to see, but I don't believe they can do it on our own, and I don't believe they can do it without my community. So can you please help me, help them, help us?
Thank you, River. That was incredible. I actually have just realised I met you. I think you and Marvina maybe came down for...
In Liverpool.
Ooh. Yeah.
Yeah, and I met you at the... I've actually got you on my... I'll show you now. I've got you on my bedroom wall.
Oh, okay. Amazing.
No, it's because it's a picture with Sasha. So
yeah.
1 second. Turn that one, can you remember? That's me.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
You and Sasha.
That was a gorgeous day. But
Yeah,
no, thank you for speaking so honestly about your experiences in climate justice spaces. I think that's really put an actual tangible example of what we're speaking about, you know, protest spaces having to be safe. We actually, I was down in London for Just Stop Oil, but I was speaking at a different festival, and my partner went along with our little one, and basically got lost in the crowd because they went too fast, and there was this whole thing, and I was like, I'm gonna have to give some feedback.
That's what I did. I gave feedback immediately. I was like, you know, because they'd put my buddy, because my daughter came with me, and so I got a buddy for my daughter and a buddy for myself, but then they'd put them on different coaches, so they were setting off from a different area, and I was like, how vulnerable am I just with 50 activists that don't know enough about BLM? You might have come to our protest, but you're not my buddies, you're not my allies, and I don't know who you are or where you're from. And I just stressed to them, you know, anybody could have turned up. Like the last one that I was in a couple of weeks ago, the Orange Men turned up. Now, if I'd have been on my own and the Orange Men had turned up, and nobody understands what the difference is between those groups, and I was like, you cannot put me at risk like that. You have to learn how it is to have Black people on your side, and to how to be allies to us, to have me in my full BLM gear, but that vulnerable by myself in the middle of Westminster with thousands of people that I don't recognise all of. I was just like, never again. So, but I can't do this on my own, Chantelle. So I am asking.
No, definitely not. And hopefully something we're hoping to work on as BLM Merseyside is getting some more and more people of colour on board, and building a bit of a northern kind of cohort of people who are really keen on environmentalism. So for instance, on the weekend, like when I was somewhere else, potentially we'd have other people who could attend. But what I'm going to do now is open up the floor. We've got 15 minutes left for questions. So if anyone's got a question, put your digital hand up. I can see Paul's hand's gone up. Who else have we got? Oh, Paul, I think it's just you for now. Let's have a look. Paul, go on, unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me? I've had problems earlier with my microphone.
You're coming through loud and clear.
Yeah, really impressive talk from everybody. There's one thing I want to raise, because it really does concern Britain. I was just about to put something in. Colonialism has continued because of the offshore banking system. The Britain is
Oh, Paul, you are breaking up for me just now. Is it just me, or is Paul breaking up for everyone? Give me a nod.
Switch your camera off, Paul, and see if that helps.
It's gone to other countries.
I don't think that's working. Paul, if you can, would you be able to type it
like
in
the United States,
chat?
But it was Britain who began it.
Oh, if you could type it into the chat, and then I will come back to it if you don't manage to type it into the chat, and see if you want to speak your question. It's just like there's not much that's coming through on that. Sue, I'll go along my screen. Sue Ward, would you like to unmute?
Thank you. Thanks everybody that's spoken. I feel as if I've learnt an awful lot. I joined Extinction Rebellion in November 19. I was in London at the time. I was living with my daughter, and I went along to the Hackney group of Extinction Rebellion. And that particular night, and I was told it was the biggest XR group in the world, I think, and it was a massive amount of people there. And that particular night, the subject was on colonization. And you will know that Hackney is a very diverse community, and they were agonising over the fact that there was maybe one Asian bloke there, and there was an African woman who'd come to speak to the meeting, but they were really agonising over the fact that they were white middle class, that they didn't want to be. I then joined Just Stop Oil after watching a Zoom meeting where there was it was an ORAT talk. It's our responsibilities at this time talk about the urgency of the situation and trying to get people to join. But what made me join was because I am like working class Liverpool person, and there was 3 women talking on that Zoom meeting who were obvious to me. Maybe I'm prejudiced, but anybody with a southern accent sounds posh to me and middle class. Maybe they weren't middle class, but they all sounded middle class to me. But all 3 women have been in prison, including an 80-year-old vicar called Sue Parfitt. So I signed up for Just Stop Oil then and went along to the action. So that's just my background. But my question is, 3 questions. How do you find Black-owned companies to use to buy food from? What are orange men? And what's BLM gear? That was the sort of the notes that I'd made. If anybody could just enlighten me.
I can answer that.
Thanks.
Go on, River.
Yeah, okay. So, sorry, can you break down the questions one by one? I'm ADHD, so I'm all flying around.
I think you said Black-owned companies that you.
So Black-owned companies. So yeah, you can have a look online. You can also, there's plenty on Facebook. There's plenty on Google. And if you go to Black areas, so go to areas where Black and POC people live, and you'll see their businesses. Start using them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Keep the money in the community and start using the Black pound. So the Black pound is where you invest in Black-owned companies and you invest in Black businesses. If you're going to go and get your hair done, I couldn't recommend black hairdressers more. They will never get your hair done better than you will at the Black hairdressers. I don't care who you are. Seek and you shall find on that one. But yeah, if you Google it, but there are lots of Facebook pages, Instagram pages that promote Black-owned companies as well. And if you put in the Black coin as well, things will come up. So I think the other question is, who are the orange men? So I learned this at the RMT a couple of weeks ago. So RMT was doing their strike action and a big demo in London, which I attended with Insulet Britain and Acorn. So whilst I was there, I was walking up the road to go and meet my friends at a bar. I wasn't dressed in my Black Lives Matter attire because I was with a different organisation at the time. But I don't need a jumper or a t-shirt with BLM. I've got my skin. Like, I advertise myself quite well. Do you know what I mean? It's like the berry makes no difference. So the police have circled this band, and I'm shacking out down the street to this band, and I'm bopping away like Blue the Bear because I've heard a beat. And then the following this band is like a load of 4x4s, like Range Rovers with the Queen's head and the crown all over it. So I was like, why have you just ruined your car? Like, why have you got the Queen all over your car? Why would you've just had the Jubilee, put that face away, don't want to see it no more. It needs to go back to wherever bit of Germany it needs to come from. And so then I do not do monarchy in any description of the word. So then 3 of these orange men that suited and booted have come up to me, and my buddy has come running going, river, and the police have like blocked my way up the street. So I'm going, why are you blocking me? I'm just walking up the street. And they were like, not at the minute. And I was like, you can't stop me from walking up the street, me having no idea who these people are. So the orange men started, I think it's like 1800 or something, with somebody called William Orange. and it's all fighting between the Catholics and the Protestants and stuff like that, but they are a massively fascist group.
Sorry, is it the Orange Lodge?
No, the Orange Men.
Oh, is it not the same thing?
Don't know. Maybe.
It is the Orange Lodge, and it's about really crossing the Boyne. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So they're all like
12th of July, was it? Because they march on the 12th of July.
Yeah. So three massive skinheads, all suited and booted in their orange gear, have come running up to me, and the police said, "You need to go. This is a fascist group." I went, "I'm not going." So I said, "Fuck your Queen and country," and spat at them. And these three came for me, and so my buddy has just picked me up, put me over his shoulder and started running. And I was like, "What are you running for?" So apparently they said the government's probably sent them so that one of us ends up fighting, which usually would be me. And then that takes away from the message of RMT and make the media will only concentrate on the fact that you've been fighting.
I'm just conscious we've got 5 minutes left and we've got about 6 hands up. So basically anyone in Merseyside on this call will know the Orange Lodge because they do still march here. They had a whole other conversation, but thank you for clarifying about the Lodge and BLM attire and the other question about the Black Pound. What I am going to do unashamedly is prioritise the brown hands that are up because this is an event for people of colour to get as much information as possible. I do have the capacity to maybe go 10 minutes over, but I've got another meeting straight afterwards. So if anyone's happy to go 10 minutes over, I'll try and get through all questions, and then if not, I'd just ask everyone to keep the questions to one question each and responses to around a minute, just so we can get through everyone. So Nicholas, would you like to unmute?
Thank you, Chantelle, and thanks to the panel. I know Teresa personally, and I know Dan personally. I'm one of the local councillors in the city, and I mentioned this to Teresa. It's brilliant what you're doing, and I've learned so much, and it's about our schools. So obviously we're on this summer break, but really like to get that message to our schools because our future generation, our kids, they can help make the changes and start questioning us as adults as well. The other thing is I was on the Liverpool City region climate partnership, and they were presenting something last week, and I was like, what about the Black and Asian and minority group? What, you talk about stakeholders, how many were there? And they said to me, Tash, reach us, like, what have you done? Have you gone to those community groups? Have you identified those groups? Because I am so fed up of hearing it's so hard to reach when they're not making an effort to engage with those people. So from this group, and the panel is fabulous, I would like to see us push forward into that city region. And it's not that we had to reach, it's just you're not engaging with us or listening to what we want to say.
That was an incredible point. I'll let any of the other panelists come back, but I agree with every point you make. I find it hard to reach to be completely patronising as a terminology. It's just that you don't really want to get to us. It's not that we're hard to reach. Ashley, if you're able to put Merseyside BLM's email in the chat, that's what we're hoping to get, a northern sort of coalition of people of colour who are driving forward the fight against climate change and all of that stuff that you just described. So we would 100% support that. I'll just see if any of the other panelists wanted to come in dead quickly on that.
Yeah, I would tend to say that a lot of it comes through the changes that we need to see in the educational curriculum as well, in terms of decolonizing the curriculum, but authentically doing it as well, not still kind of making it watered down, but actually letting people of color, those lived experiences and that their kind of heritage and culture within local communities, but also nationally, be leading the conversation on how we do decolonize the curriculum, because often there are little pockets of where teachers, particularly teachers of color who are in their professions, trying to do it, but the national curriculum and the exam boards don't allow the kind of framework and context to do that. And so it's now us being able to link in with the NEU, link in with the ASUWT on how we do decolonize that curriculum in an authentic way, and then put the driving force and pressure on people who set the national curriculum, the exam boards, to be able to do that as well.
Definitely. And I think a big underline for decolonising the curriculum, especially in Merseyside with our colonial history, our ledger is not clean on that at all. And there's not enough
throughout history there's been a campaign for 60 years because they haven't got books in our school system that have actually been written by Black people. The whole curriculum is so whitewashed yet manipulative in their favour. So if you're going to do anything, help the campaign to actually get Black and POC authors into the curriculum of schools, colleges and universities, so that you can actually start learning the truth and not be so brainwashed by historical white people.
Definitely. Josiah, Raphael, I can see your hand up. Go.
Hiya, so thank you to everyone who's spoken tonight. It's been really interesting. So my question is this. I'm very curious. Obviously, in terms of making change, there are loads of elements that go into it: community work, grassroots organisation, activism. Politics is a big one. For me, the Green Party has always been something which is very white, middle class, hippie, and not really something here for people of colour. I'm very conscious right now that with Labour, it's kind of set itself against a lot of things which are the principles which the Scousers in here kind of stand for. So I'm very curious to see what people think about whether the Green Party is a viable alternative or what kind of political pathways there are to change.
Anyone who wants to come in on that out the panel, please.
I don't mind doing that. I've done a bit of work with the Green Party and also Greenpeace as well. And I hear what you're saying, but that's where, as far as I'm concerned, that's where solidarity comes into it. We're all spouting solidarity. We're all shouting coalition. We need to come together as one voice, because at the end of the day, we're saying very similar things, but we're saying it in our own manner. But evidently, it is actually the same goal that we're trying to achieve. And as far as I'm concerned, whether you're part of a tribe or a clan, it's time to unite them. That's how we know this, and that's how we bring more diversity, more equality into those spaces, and we move as one rather than individual voices.
Brilliant. I know Dan's a political person on the panel. Did you want to add anything to that?
Go on. I know a little thing or two about politics. I think the big thing when you're talking about any type of like political parties, for me anyway, this is just like how I'm kind of viewing things at the moment, and I'm happy to share it, is that at the end of the day, like the forces that control the system, you know, within capital that control the system, they have control over the main political parties at the moment. The top few, you know, from the Greens, Lib Dems, Labour, Tory, they definitely have, like, there's their control comes from capital, it comes from neoliberalism, it comes from capitalism, and they're institutionally just based in that now. Now, there are the ones to the left, you know, Labour, people say SNP is, but other people disagree, and then also the Greens. And I think the thing is, what we can do is we can definitely pull them in our direction. People are talking at the moment about like the strength of people against Margaret Thatcher and the poll tax. People are talking about the strength of people bringing in the reduction in pension age in the Labour Party in the 90s. And so to very quickly wrap up is that we can have power in those organizations, but when it comes to the issues that matter in fighting capital, they're all our enemy. Like for me as a member of the Labour Party, I'm, you know, fighting from within the enemy. That is what I'm doing there. And I think that's the one thing we've all got to remember, is that together we're fighting within that enemy, whether it's the people inside trying to make change or the people outside. At the end of the day, you get my solidarity. The main aim for me is socialism and an end to capitalism.
Amazing. Thank you, Dan. I don't know if that's our note to end on, because I've noticed the other hands have gone down and we're at just 1:30. So unless there's any burning questions, are we okay to close it on Dan's comments? Are we okay with that? Amazing. In the chat, there are some email addresses of brilliant organisations. There's loads of links. I'm going to be in Scotland speaking at the Scottish Climate Camp on Saturday. I know there's loads of free elements to that, free travel, free food. So check that out. And I think Teresa's put information about the next Just Stop Oil meetings, one being tomorrow in Liverpool in the Quaker House, Teresa. I can't find your comment, but I think it's the Quaker.
It's next to the Blue Coat in the city centre, you know, by Primark, just facing Primark, yeah.
And that's 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. tomorrow.
Yeah.
Amazing. We are going to send out a resource pack, and also we're going to send out a little survey if you can complete it about how today went, and also there'll be a tick box if you want to be kept informed about future climate justice events, and also about any coalitions that we're trying to set up in Merseyside. And last but not least, if anyone fancies supporting our work, we will put our PayPal. Ashley, can we put it in the comments? Our PayPal details in the comments. BLM are massively underfunded. We basically get a few £100 if someone's feeling nice once a year. So if anyone wants to support our work, Ashley will drop the PayPal in the chat. Thank you to everyone. You have been amazing. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to everyone who's asked a question. Thank you to River for contributing about Just Stop Oil. And thank you to everyone for coming along. Have a gorgeous rest of your week. Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Keep safe.
Thank you.
And whoever's in the BLM account, can you stop recording, please?